The maid stole the bride's veil. Billionaire froze when he saw what was hidden inside. Elena Ruiz had exactly 4 minutes before the wedding planner came looking for her, and she used every one of them to slide her fingers along the seam of the veil. She wasn't supposed to touch it. No one but the bride's stylist was supposed to touch it. But the box had been left open on the vanity in the East Wing, unattended, while Vanessa Cole argued with her mother in the hallway about seating charts, and Elena had seen something that made her stop breathing for a second. A small ridge running along the inner hem, stitched in a color that didn't quite match the rest of the lace. She had folded linens in this house for 3 years. She knew the difference between a flaw and a deliberate seam. Her hands were shaking when she lifted the veil out of its tissue paper and turned it over. There, hidden behind a fold that no camera would ever catch, was a slit, hand-stitched, careful, old. Something had been sewn inside it. Something that had been there a long time. She heard footsteps in the hallway. She had 4 minutes. She had maybe 40 seconds left of them. She made a decision that would end her job, possibly end her freedom, and change the last name of everyone in that house before the sun went down. She took the veil. If you're the kind of person who believes the truth always finds its way out, even when someone spends years trying to bury it, you're going to want to stay for this one. This channel is for stories about the quiet people who notice what everyone else misses, and the cost of finally saying something. If that's the kind of story you come here for, consider sticking around and subscribing because we've got a lot more of them coming. Now back to that vanity and the 4 minutes that started all of it. Elena had taken the housekeeping job at the Whitfield estate 2 years after her mother died, and she had taken it for exactly one reason, one she never said out loud to anyone who worked there. Her mother, Marisol, had worked in this same house 16 years earlier, as a seamstress, mending linens and altering gowns for a family so wealthy that a torn hem was handled the same day it happened. Marisol had been let go abruptly, without severance, without a reference, accused of something the family never fully explained to her. She had come home that night and packed her sewing kit into a box and never spoken about the Whitfields again, except once, near the end, in a hospital bed, when the morphine loosened something in her that 13 years of silence hadn't. "I didn't take it," she had said. "Tell them I didn't take it if you ever get the chance." Elena had asked what it was. Her mother had already drifted back to sleep. She never woke up enough to answer. So Elena had spent 2 years dusting the same banisters her mother once dusted, hoping that somewhere in that house was proof of what her mother had been accused of, and proof that she hadn't done it. She hadn't expected to find it sewn into a bride's veil 3 hours before a wedding. Daniel Whitfield was 45 years old, and by every account that mattered to the people who wrote about such things, he had done everything right. He'd taken over his father's investment firm at 28, doubled it by 35, and spent the years since quietly, almost stubbornly, without much of a personal life to speak of. His mother, Eleanor, had died when he was 29, and something about him had gone still after that. Not cold, just careful. He didn't trust easily. His staff liked him for it, actually. He was the rare kind of wealthy man who remembered the names of the people who worked for him and asked how their children were doing. Which was, in its own way, exactly why what was about to happen mattered so much. Vanessa Cole was 34, poised, warm in the particular way that photographs well, and by the time she and Daniel had gotten engaged, most of the household staff had come to genuinely like her. She learned everyone's coffee order in a week. She remembered Elena's name the first day, which surprised Elena, because most guests never did. Elena had told herself more than once that the veil was probably nothing. Old dresses had strange seams. Fabric got repaired oddly sometimes. She almost put it back. Almost. But there was a second detail that stopped her, one she hadn't noticed until she was already holding the veil in her hands, already halfway to her small room off the kitchen, heart slamming against her ribs. Tucked into the box beneath the tissue paper, half hidden, was a folded card in Eleanor Whitfield's handwriting. Elena recognized it instantly, because she'd seen it before, on an old recipe card in the kitchen drawer that nobody had ever thrown away. The card read, "For my son's wife. Whoever she is. Ask her about the necklace before you let her wear this." Nothing else. No explanation. Just that. Elena sat on the edge of her bed with the veil in her lap and the card in her hand, and for the first time in 2 years, she understood that her mother's ghost and this wedding were about to collide, whether she wanted them to or not. She should have gone straight to Daniel. She knew that even then. But Daniel Whitfield was a careful man who trusted evidence over accusations, and Elena had neither. Only a strange note and a hidden seam and a feeling in her chest she couldn't yet explain. So she did the only thing she could think to do with the 40 minutes she had left before someone noticed the veil was missing. She cut the stitching. Inside the hem, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was a single photograph and a folded receipt from a jeweler downtown, dated 17 years ago. The photograph showed 2 young women standing outside that same jeweler, arms looped together, laughing at something outside the frame. Elena recognized her mother instantly. Younger, her hair longer, a scarf Elena remembered from a shoebox of old photos at home. The other woman she didn't recognize. Not at first. Then she looked again at the shape of the jaw, the particular tilt of the chin, and her stomach dropped, because she'd seen that same expression, aged 34 years, in the hallway that very morning, arguing about seating charts. It wasn't Vanessa. It was a woman who looked enough like Vanessa's mother to be her twin. The receipt was for a diamond and sapphire necklace. The buyer's name, written in careful cursive at the bottom, was not Eleanor Whitfield's. It was Marisol Ruiz's. Elena stared at it for a long time before the second, colder thought arrived. Her mother had never owned a diamond and sapphire anything in her life. She had died with 3 dresses and a sewing kit to her name. Someone had bought that necklace and put her mother's name on the receipt. Elena wasn't the only person in that house paying close attention that morning, though. Daniel had noticed something too. Nothing as dramatic as a hidden compartment, just a small wrongness he couldn't name. Vanessa's mother, Carol, had been unusually insistent about handling the veil box personally that morning, unusually sharp with the staff about who was allowed near it. And when Daniel had asked, mildly, why it mattered so much, Carol had laughed it off in a way that didn't quite land. He filed it away the way he filed away most things that didn't sit right. Not ignored, just set aside for a calmer moment. He had a wedding to get through first. He didn't know yet that the veil was already gone. By the time the stylist discovered the empty box, panic moved through the East Wing fast enough that it reached Daniel before anyone had the courage to tell him what exactly was missing. He found Carol first, her face doing something complicated, somewhere between fear and fury, and when he asked what had happened she said too quickly, "Nothing. It's fine. We'll find another veil." "It's my mother's veil," Daniel said. "There is no other veil." Something in the way Carol's expression flickered told him this had stopped being about lace. Elena made her decision standing in her small room, photograph in one hand, receipt in the other, hearing the commotion start down the hall. She could put it all back, say nothing, keep her job, let her mother's name stay attached to a debt that wasn't hers. Or she could walk into that chaos and hand a stranger's family a truth that might blow the wedding apart 3 hours before it started. She thought about her mother's voice in that hospital bed. "Tell them I didn't take it." She walked out into the hallway still holding the veil. Carol saw her first, and her face went through something Elena would think about for a long time afterward. Not surprise that the veil had been found, but terror about what else had been found with it. "Where did you get that?" Carol said, low enough that only Elena could hear. "I found it in a box in the East Wing," Elena said. "Along with this." She held up the photograph. Carol's hand actually moved toward it, an instinct she caught and stopped halfway. Daniel arrived in time to see that half motion, and years of reading people across a boardroom table told him more than any explanation could have. "Somebody," he said quietly, "is going to tell me what is happening in the next 30 seconds. Elena had rehearsed nothing. She simply told him. The seam, the note in his mother's handwriting, the photograph, the receipt with her own mother's name on it for a necklace her mother had never owned. She told him about the job she'd taken 2 years earlier to find out why Marisol Ruiz had been fired without explanation and had spent the rest of her life ashamed of something she swore she hadn't done. Daniel took the photograph from her hands and looked at it for a long moment, and something in his face changed the way stone changes when water finally finds the crack it's been looking for. "That's not my mother's handwriting on this receipt," he said slowly. "I know my mother's hand. This is someone imitating it. Badly." He looked up at Carol. "You were friends with my mother," he said. "It wasn't a question. Before any of this. Before Vanessa and I ever met." Carol didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Vanessa came around the corner then, still in her robe, hair half done, and stopped when she saw her mother's face. "What's going on?" she asked, and Elena watched her closely enough to notice something Vanessa herself probably didn't realize she was showing: genuine confusion. Whatever this was, Vanessa didn't seem to know about it yet. That detail would matter later. It mattered a great deal, in fact. Carol's silence lasted exactly as long as it took Daniel to say one more sentence. "I'm not walking down an aisle in an hour without understanding why my mother left a warning inside her own veil." Carol sat down on the bench in the hallway like her legs had simply stopped being willing to hold her. The story came out slowly, in pieces, the way true things usually do when someone has spent 17 years arranging them into a lie. Carol and Eleanor Whitfield had indeed been close friends once, closer than Vanessa had ever known, because the friendship had ended badly and Carol had spent years making sure her daughter never learned why. Carol had borrowed money from Eleanor during a hard stretch, more than she could easily repay, and rather than face that debt honestly, she had done something desperate. She'd taken a family necklace meant for alterations, sold it, and quietly arranged for the blame to fall on the young seamstress who happened to be handling the household's jewelry repairs that season. Marisol Ruiz. Eleanor had suspected the truth even then, Carol admitted. She'd never fully believed the story pinned on her seamstress, not really, but she hadn't had proof, only instinct, and by the time she found the receipt Carol had carelessly left behind, her friendship with Carol was already fracturing over something else entirely. Eleanor had done something quietly devastating instead of confronting her outright. She'd kept the evidence, sewn it into the one heirloom she knew would eventually be handled with enough care and enough scrutiny that the truth might someday surface on its own, the veil she intended for her son's future wife. A message across time, left for whoever loved her son enough to be trusted with it. She had died 3 years before Daniel even met Vanessa. She had no way of knowing her old friend's daughter would be the one wearing it. "I didn't know," Carol said, and for the first time her voice cracked into something that sounded almost like relief at finally saying it. "I didn't know Eleanor had kept anything. I thought it had disappeared with her." Daniel turned the photograph over in his hands one more time and then looked at Elena. Really looked at her. The way you look at someone you've walked past in a hallway for 2 years without truly seeing. "Your mother lost her job over this," he said. "Her name, her reference, everything because of a debt that was never hers. She never stopped saying she didn't take it," Elena said. "She died still saying it." Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then he did something that would matter to Elena far more than any of the money that eventually followed. He asked her mother's full name, and he wrote it down carefully, the way you write something you intend to keep. "She's owed an apology she's not here to receive," he said. "I can't fix that. But I can make sure her name stops being a lie in this family's history." Vanessa, for her part, spent the next hour doing something Elena hadn't expected. She didn't defend her mother, and she didn't collapse into the drama of it either. She sat with Carol in the hallway, quiet, working through what her mother had actually done, and when she finally stood up, her eyes were dry and her voice was steady in a way that told Elena everything about the kind of person she'd chosen to marry into this family. "I need time," Vanessa told Daniel, "before I put on anything your mother wore, knowing what my mother did to get it into that box." Daniel nodded like he'd expected exactly that answer and respected her more for giving it. The wedding didn't happen that afternoon. It happened 6 weeks later, smaller, quieter, without Carol present, in a garden instead of a ballroom, with a veil that had been carefully restored, its seam rewoven by a professional seamstress Daniel hired for the job, a young woman he'd specifically requested because her name was Elena Ruiz. And he thought it was fitting that the daughter of the woman his mother had tried to protect should be the one to make the veil whole again. The consequences landed where they belonged. Carol didn't go to prison. The debt was old, the money long spent, and Daniel, in the end, chose to let the truth be the punishment rather than drag a courtroom into it. But she lost something she valued more than she expected to. Her daughter's easy trust, and the standing she'd built for herself in a social world that did not forgive quietly. She moved out of the city within the year. Daniel made good on what he'd promised in that hallway. He tracked down Marisol Ruiz's old employment file, added a formal signed correction to it, and had it sent, pointlessly in the practical sense, since she would never read it, but not pointlessly at all in the sense that mattered. Elena kept that letter in the same kitchen drawer her mother had once kept her unopened one in. Except Elena's was one she read, on purpose, every year on the day her mother died. She kept her job. She was offered, eventually, something better. A role managing the household's more delicate work, the kind of trust that isn't handed out, only earned. She took it because for the first time in years, she wasn't working in that house to solve a mystery anymore. She was just working there, the way anyone works somewhere they've decided to stay. On the day of the smaller wedding, Elena stood near the back of the garden, not as staff exactly, more as a guest who happened to know how to fix a hem if anyone needed it. She watched Vanessa walk down the aisle in her mother-in-law's veil, whole again, the old stitching invisible beneath the new, and she thought about a woman in a hospital bed who never got to hear the 4 words she'd spent her final months waiting for. You didn't take it. Somebody finally knew. If you'd found what Elena found sewn into that veil, would you have walked away and pretended you never saw it? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Tell us in the comments because we'd genuinely love to know. And if you believe the truth is worth waiting years for, even when it costs you something to find it, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes people can change. We've got a lot more stories like this one coming, and we'd love to have you back for the next one.